Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with energy. The rolling of suitcase wheels, last-minute boarding calls, and the distant hum of coffee machines created a familiar rhythm. Among the sea of travelers, Isabella Izzy Morales stood near the first-class lounge, her heart beating with a mix of excitement and pride. Today was a milestone, her first time flying first class, a reward for earning a full-ride scholarship to Harvard University. It wasn't just a flight, it was a symbol of how far she had come. Her grandmother's words rang in her head, "Mija, you worked for this. No one can take your worth away." Adjusting the strap of her designer carry-on, an early gift from her abuelo, grandfather, she inhaled deeply. As she stepped inside the exclusive first-class lounge, it felt almost surreal. The leather chairs, the soft jazz music, the smell of freshly brewed espresso, it was a world she wasn't used to, but one she belonged in now. She smoothed her sleek outfit, taking a seat near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her phone buzzed, a text from her abuela, "Send me a picture, I want to see my Harvard girl." Izzy smiled, snapping a quick selfie. She had no idea her moment of triumph would soon turn into public humiliation. In just a few minutes, a certain flight attendant with a superiority complex would make sure she never forgot this flight. But what Susan Thompson didn't know, Izzy was about to make her regret it. The boarding gate for Flight 317 to Boston was bustling with passengers eager to get to their seats. Isabella Izzy Morales stepped forward, boarding pass in hand, excitement still bubbling inside her. But as she reached the front of the first-class line, she noticed the woman scanning tickets, Susan Thompson, the lead flight attendant. Susan greeted an older white man before Izzy with a polite, "Welcome aboard, sir. Enjoy your flight." The woman behind him, draped in designer clothes, got a warm smile and a nod. Then it was Izzy's turn. Susan barely glanced at her before frowning at the bold letters on the boarding pass, "First class." Her lips pursed. "Miss, I think you're in the wrong line. Economy is that way," she said, pointing toward the back of the plane. Izzy blinked, taken aback. "No, this is my seat. First class, 2A. She held up the ticket for emphasis. Susan let out a small, condescending sigh. There must be a mistake. Her eyes swept over Izzy's modest but stylish outfit, as if searching for proof she didn't belong. "Please step aside while I verify." Passengers behind Izzy shuffled impatiently, whispering amongst themselves. She felt heat rise to her face, a mix of anger and humiliation. She wasn't about to let this happen. Not today. With her heart pounding, Izzy stood her ground, refusing to move. "There's no mistake," she said firmly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And just like that, the battle had begun. Izzy finally made her way to seat 2A, her rightful first-class seat, but the tension had already taken root. She could feel Susan's eyes burning holes into her back as she placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment. Settling into the plush leather seat, she exhaled, willing herself to stay calm. Just as she thought the ordeal was over, a shadow loomed over her. She turned to see Susan standing there, arms crossed, lips tight with disapproval. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to move," Susan said, her voice laced with false politeness. "This seat has been reassigned." Izzy's fingers tightened around her seatbelt. "Reassigned? How?" She pulled out her boarding pass, flashing it again. "My ticket says 2A, first class. There's been no reassignment." Susan let out a sharp huff of impatience. "Miss, if you don't comply, I'll have to involve security." Passengers turned their heads at the growing tension. Some whispered, some just watched in silent judgment. Izzy's blood boiled. "You're making a mistake," she said through clenched teeth. "I belong here just as much as anyone else." Susan's eyes flickered with something, a mix of challenge and disbelief. This girl wasn't backing down. "Fine," Susan thought. "If she wants to fight, I'll bring in backup." Without another word, she stormed off toward the flight deck. Moments later, 2 uniformed security officers entered the first-class cabin. And just like that, the situation had escalated. As the 2 security officers approached, the weight of every passenger's gaze pressed down on Izzy. She could feel the whispers swirling around her like a storm, some filled with quiet sympathy, others dripping with silent judgment. Her heart pounded, but she kept her face composed. "Ma'am," one of the officers said, his tone measured but firm, "we've been informed that there's been an issue with your seating assignment." Izzy held up her boarding pass once again, her hand steady. "There's no issue. This is my assigned seat." Susan, standing with arms folded like a victorious queen, interjected, "She was mistakenly placed in first class. This seat belongs to another passenger." Izzy's jaw tightened. "That's a lie," she said coldly. The tension snapped like a whip through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others seemed almost entertained by the drama unfolding before them. The officer glanced between Izzy's ticket and Susan's unwavering stance. His hesitation was brief. "Miss, we're going to have to ask you to move to economy." Izzy's stomach dropped, but she refused to give in. Her father's words echoed in her head, "Never let someone decide your worth for you." A sharp inhale, a squared jaw, and Izzy met the officer's gaze. "No," she said, voice strong and unwavering. Susan's smirk faltered. She hadn't expected resistance. "Then I suggest you call the captain," Izzy continued, her confidence rising. "Because this fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot." Izzy sat in her cramped economy seat, her fists clenched in frustration. The humiliation burned in her chest like fire, but she refused to let her emotions get the best of her. Around her, passengers continued to murmur, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others pretending not to notice. But Izzy noticed everything: the way Susan strutted through first class like she had won a personal battle, the way the flight attendants avoided her gaze. With a deep breath, she reached for her phone. One message. Just one. "Dad, they forced me to economy." Seconds later, the reply came. "Stay put. I'm handling it." Izzy exhaled, feeling a flicker of relief. Her father wasn't just any passenger, he was the CEO of the airline. And while he wasn't one to flaunt his power, he was never one to let injustice slide. Up in the cockpit, the secure phone line rang. The captain, an experienced pilot with decades of flights under his belt, picked up. The voice on the other end was calm but commanding. "Captain, this is Victor Langston. My daughter is on your flight, and I've just been informed she was removed from her first-class seat under false pretenses. I want her returned to her seat. Immediately." The captain's eyes hardened. This wasn't just a customer complaint, it was an order. Susan had made a very big mistake. And now, she was about to learn just how big. The tension in the first-class cabin was so thick it could be cut with a knife. As the plane cruised smoothly through the sky, Susan tried to keep her composure, but the uneasy glances from her fellow flight attendants told her that something was wrong. Then came the announcement. "Miss Susan Carter, report to the cockpit immediately." A chill ran down her spine. Flight attendants never got called to the cockpit unless something serious had happened. The murmurs from the passengers only made her heartbeat quicken. With stiff steps, she walked past the rows of luxury seats, forcing a tight-lipped smile, but inside, she was spiraling. As soon as she entered, she saw the captain's hard-set expression. The moment the door clicked shut, his voice cut through the air like a blade. "Miss Carter, I just got off the phone with Victor Langston, CEO of this airline. His daughter, Izzy Langston, was removed from her rightful seat in first class. Care to explain why?" Susan's mouth went dry. She opened it to speak, but no words came out. "She presented a valid first-class ticket," the captain continued, his voice dangerously low. "Yet, instead of honoring it, you humiliated her, dismissed her, and degraded her, on my flight. Do you have any justification for that?" Susan swallowed hard. She had made a grave mistake. And now, she was going to face the consequences. The first-class cabin fell into absolute silence as Susan Carter stood frozen, her face drained of all color. The weight of the captain's words hung over her like a death sentence, but she wasn't prepared for what came next. The intercom crackled to life, but instead of the usual in-flight updates, the captain's voice rang with an authority that sent shivers down every passenger's spine. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to address an unacceptable incident that took place on this flight," his voice boomed. "A valued first-class passenger was publicly humiliated and wrongfully removed from her seat. And I want to make it clear, this airline does not tolerate prejudice, discrimination, or abuse of power under any circumstances." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Passengers turned in their seats, eyes darting between Susan and Izzy. Some whispered in disbelief. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, as the realization settled in. Izzy sat composed, but the fire in her eyes burned with quiet vindication. Then, the captain delivered the final blow. "Susan Carter, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty. You will not be continuing this flight in a working capacity. Instead, upon landing, you will be escorted off the aircraft for further review of your employment status." Susan's knees nearly buckled. The passengers erupted into applause. Some even cheered. Izzy simply tilted her head slightly and met Susan's horrified gaze. The balance of power had shifted. And justice, swift, undeniable, and absolute, had finally been served.